I'm Sloane. I'm 30 years old, and last week my father called me crying. It was a jagged, hollow sound, the kind of noise that shouldn't come from a man who spent 3 decades acting like he was made of granite. The first time in my entire life I'd ever heard him break. 2 years ago, I was the one calling my parents in tears, the kind of sobbing that makes your ribs ache and your lungs feel like they're filling with concrete. Having just received a stage 3 cancer diagnosis, my dad said one sentence that I will never forget. 6 months of chemotherapy, 36 trips to the hospital, and not a single visit from my family. They were too busy planning my brother's wedding at a private estate in the Berkshires. Now my father needs me, and my answer was exactly 4 words. Before I continue, if you end up liking the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back 2 years to the day I got the call from my doctor. I was a senior graphic designer at a high-pressure boutique agency in Boston's Seaport District, the kind of place where the office culture is a mix of toxic productivity and aesthetic minimalism. Think exposed brick walls, too many succulents, and an industrial La Marzocco espresso machine that cost more than my first Honda Civic. I loved my job. I was good at it. I'd clawed my way up from a low-paid intern to senior lead in 5 years through pure, unadulterated grit. No help from anyone. My apartment was a 1-bedroom in Somerville. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had a monstera plant on the windowsill that I'd kept alive for 3 years, which felt like a minor miracle considering my 80-hour work weeks. I had a routine. Coffee at 6:30, gym 3 times a week, dinner with my friend Harper on Thursdays. That Wednesday started like any other. I was in the middle of a campaign for a big client, some fintech startup with a deadline that made my eye twitch. My laptop was open, Slack notifications pinging every 30 seconds, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was in the zone, the creative flow. But something made me pick up. Miss Sterling, this is Dr. Patterson's office. We have your biopsy results. I remember the exact temperature of my coffee, lukewarm and bitter, because I'd forgotten about it for an hour. I remember the way the afternoon light hit the glass partition of the conference room, casting long, clinical shadows across my Wacom tablet. I remember thinking, biopsy results shouldn't come with this tone of voice. The results are back, the nurse continued. Dr. Patterson would like you to come in tomorrow morning. Can you be here at 8 a.m.? My Starbucks cup sat untouched for the rest of the day. I didn't taste anything at dinner that night. I just kept thinking, they don't call you in for good news. The next morning, Dr. Patterson didn't waste time. Stage 3 breast cancer, she said, her voice gentle but clinical. The tumor is aggressive. We need to start treatment immediately. I sat in that sterile office with its framed diplomas and the faint scent of industrial-grade disinfectant, and I felt my body leave the chair like I was watching myself from somewhere near the ceiling. A 30-year-old woman, still wearing the Fury blazer she'd put on for a client meeting, hearing words that belonged in a tragic Hulu documentary, not her own life. Miss Sterling? Sloane? I blinked. Sorry, Yes, I'm here. Do you have someone who can drive you home? I thought about calling Harper, but it was barely 9 a.m., and she had a double shift at the hospital. My co-workers were acquaintances, people I traded professional pleasantries with over Slack, not people I wanted to see me break. And then, without thinking, I said, I'll call my dad. Here's what you need to understand about the Sterling family hierarchy. My father, Richard Dick Sterling, was the kind of man who believed his word was law. He carried himself with the immovable arrogance of old-school East Coast money. Not in a cartoon villain way, but in that quiet, immovable way that makes everyone around him adjust their lives to accommodate his opinions. When I was growing up, we didn't argue with Dad. We didn't question Dad. We just did what Dad said. Despite the years of feeling second best, I still reached for him in that moment. Because that's what daughters do, isn't it? When the world falls apart, you call your father. I walked out of the oncologist's office, found a bench in the hallway that smelled like floor wax and anxiety, and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to tap his contact. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Sloane, what is it? I'm in the middle of something." I should back up. Let me explain the Sterling family dynamic. My brother Brooks is 2 years younger than me, but you'd never know it by the way our parents treated us. Brooks was the heir apparent. I was background radiation. Brooks got a full ride to Boston College, not because he earned a scholarship, but because Dad wrote the check without blinking. I got told that girls don't need expensive degrees and took out tens of thousands in student loans for a state school. When Brooks got his first job, Dad threw a party at an upscale steakhouse. When I got promoted to senior lead, Mom texted me a thumbs up emoji. Brooks had just gotten engaged to Madison, a perfectly pleasant woman with perfectly highlighted hair and a perfectly boring job in HR. The wedding was set for October, 4 months away, and it had consumed my family like a black hole consuming light. Every conversation was about the wedding. Every family dinner was wedding planning. My mother had a Pinterest board with nearly 1,000 pins dedicated to silk linens and floral arrangements. "Dad," I said into the phone, my voice cracking, "I just came from the doctor. I have cancer. Stage 3. Silence. I waited. I could hear him breathing. Somewhere in the background, I heard my mother's voice asking who was calling. I could hear the clink of silverware. They were probably having a mid-morning brunch. "Dad, did you hear me?" More silence. "Then I need to tell you something," he finally said about that doctor's appointment. "We're going to need to talk about this later." But he didn't say later. He said something else. Around that time, I started keeping screenshots of our text conversations. I told myself it was just to remember things. Chemo brain is a terrifying fog, and I didn't want the truth to drift away. But maybe part of me already knew I'd need proof. "Dad, I have cancer," I repeated slower this time, like maybe he hadn't understood. "The doctor says it's stage 3. I need to start chemotherapy right away. I'm really scared." I was crying now, tears streaming down my face in that hospital hallway. A nurse walked by and gave me a pitying look. I turned toward the wall, phone pressed against my ear, waiting for my father to say the words I needed to hear. "Come home. We'll figure this out. You're not alone." Instead, I got silence. 5 seconds. 10. The air in the hallway felt thin, like I was standing on top of a mountain with no oxygen. "Sloane, listen. Your mother and we can't deal with this right now." I stopped breathing. "Your brother is planning his wedding. Do you understand? The wedding is in 4 months and there's so much to do. We can't take this on right now. Sloane, you're a strong girl. You've always been independent. You'll figure it out." His voice hardened, gaining that clinical edge he used when dismissing a low-performing employee. "I have to go. Brooks and Madison are coming over to finalize the venue deposit." The line went dead with a hollow, digital click. I sat on that bench for 45 minutes. People walked past. Doctors, nurses, patients, families. Nobody stopped. I was just another person in a hallway having the kind of day that splits your life into before and after. I wanted to call back. I wanted to scream, "Your daughter might be dying!" I wanted to say, "A wedding is one day. Cancer is every day for the rest of whatever time I have left." But I didn't say anything. I just screenshot the call log. 9:47 a.m. Duration 2 minutes 31 seconds. I added it to a folder I titled The Sterlings, and I didn't look back. That was the moment the Sloane they knew died, and the survivor was born. The first day of chemotherapy, I drove myself to the hospital. The Massachusetts General Infusion Center was a temple of clinical efficiency and quiet desperation. It was on the 4th floor, a room full of high-end leather reclining chairs arranged in a semicircle, each one equipped with an IV stand and a small television mounted on an adjustable arm. It looked like a first-class airline lounge designed by someone who'd only read about comfort in medical journals. I checked in, signed a stack of liability forms, and was assigned to chair 7. The nurse, a kind woman named Rita with reading glasses on a beaded chain, accessed my port and started the drip. "First time?" she asked. I nodded. "It's okay to be nervous, honey. Most people bring someone with them." I looked around the room. She was right. The space was thick with the presence of family. Chair 3 had a woman whose husband held her hand the entire session, whispering things that made her smile, even as poison dripped into her veins through a plastic tube. Chair 5 had a teenager whose mother sat beside him, reading aloud from Harry Potter to drown out the hum of the machines. Chair 9 had an elderly man whose daughter had brought homemade soup in a thermos. Chair 7 had me. Just me. And my iPhone, which remained stubbornly silent. I texted my mother. "Starting chemo today. I'm scared." She replied 6 hours later, after I was already home, curled up on my cold bathroom floor with a level of nausea I wasn't prepared for. A bone-deep sickness that felt like my very cells were vibrating. "Hang in there, sweetie. Mom's at the florist with Madison picking centerpieces. Peonies or roses? What do you think?" I stared at that message for a long time, the blue light of the screen reflecting off the white tiles. Then I screenshot it, added it to the folder, and typed back. "Roses are nice." I didn't tell her I'd spent the last hour dry heaving. I didn't tell her that I'd had to pull over twice on the drive home because my vision was blurring into a dizzying kaleidoscope of taillights and rain. I didn't tell her anything real. What was the point? In the Sterling universe, aesthetics always trumped agony. I met Harper Sullivan during my 3rd chemo session. She was a nurse practitioner who ran a support group for cancer patients, one of those hospital programs that exists because someone wrote a grant proposal about holistic care or patient wellness outcomes. I'd ignored the flyers for 2 weeks until Harper approached me directly. "You're always alone," she said, sitting down in the empty chair next to mine. She had curly red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of direct eye contact that made it hard to lie. I noticed these things. People in Boston usually mind their own business, but Harper looked at me like she was reading my chart without even touching it. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine," she smiled, but it wasn't pitying. It was warm. "I asked why you're always alone." Big difference. I should have brushed her off. I should have said something polite and dismissive, the way I'd learned to handle conversations I didn't want to have. But I was 3 rounds into chemo. My hair was starting to thin, and I hadn't had a real conversation with anyone in weeks. "My family is busy," I said. And then, because something about Harper made honesty feel safe, I added the bitter truth. "With my brother's wedding." Her expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or anger on my behalf. "When's the wedding?" "October." "And when's your last chemo session scheduled?" "November." She nodded slowly. "You know, we keep visitor logs at this hospital. Every patient, every visit, who came to see them and when. It's mostly for security, but some people request copies later, for their records, for their memories." I didn't understand why she was telling me this, not then, but I filed it away, and 3 days later, I requested my first copy. It was a clean white sheet of paper with my name at the top and a hauntingly empty table below it. Brooks's wedding was scheduled for October 15th. I was between chemo cycles, the brief window where I felt almost human, where the nausea had faded but the exhaustion hadn't fully set in. I wasn't planning to go. I hadn't been asked to be in the wedding party, not even as a reader or a candle lighter. But I thought maybe I'd show up, sit in the back, see my family. Then my father called, one of his rare, tactical calls. "Sloane, about the wedding," he started. "Your mother and I have been talking." Hope flickered in my chest. Stupid, stubborn, primitive hope that maybe they had realized I was a person and not a ghost. "We think it's best if you don't attend." The hope died. It didn't just fade. It was extinguished with a cold, heavy thud. "You understand?" He continued as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. "You look unwell. You've lost weight. Your hair..." He cleared his throat. "It's Brooks's special day. We don't want anything to overshadow it." Anything meaning me. Overshadow meaning remind everyone that his daughter was fighting for her life while they celebrated hand-scripted seating charts and a 5-tier vanilla bean cake. "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood exactly what kind of family I had. The wedding happened without me. I saw the photos on Facebook. My mother's post got 247 likes while I lay in bed recovering from round 4. My father in his custom Brooks Brothers suit, beaming like a king. My mother in champagne silk, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Brooks and Madison, golden and glowing, surrounded by 150 guests who had no idea the groom's sister existed. The caption read, "The happiest day of our family's life." I screenshot it. Folder, the Sterlings. Then I closed Facebook and didn't open it again for 6 months. Some things you don't need to see twice. 3 weeks after the wedding, the medical bills started arriving. My insurance covered a lot, thank God for my agency's PPO plan, but a lot isn't the same as everything. After deductibles, co-pays, and the medications my plan considered non-formulary, I was looking at $47,000. $47,000 I didn't have. I sold my car. I canceled every subscription. I stopped buying groceries that weren't on sale. And when that still wasn't enough, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do again. I asked my father for help. Dad, I'm in trouble. The medical bills are more than I can handle. Could I borrow some money? I'll pay it back. I stared at that text for 20 minutes before sending it. My finger hovered over the button like it was a detonator. But I was desperate, and desperation makes you forget your pride. His response came 2 hours later. Your mother and I just finished paying for Brooks's wedding. We don't have extra right now. Have you looked into a personal loan? Your credit should be good enough. I read it 3 times, waiting for a follow-up, a sorry or an I wish we could help, or even a we love you. Nothing came. $47,000. That was the price of my survival. And my family, who had just spent $80,000 on a wedding for my brother, as Brooks had proudly mentioned to relatives, couldn't spare a dime. I screenshot the conversation, added it to the folder. Then I applied for a personal loan with a 14% interest rate, because what other choice did I have? I'd be paying it off for years, but I'd be alive to do it. The worst night came after round 4. My oncologist had warned me about the cumulative effects. Chemo builds up, each round harder than the last. But nothing prepares you for lying on your bathroom floor at 2 a.m., shaking so hard your teeth chatter, while your body tries to reject every cell it contains. I lost my hair that night. Not gradually, the way it had been going, strand by strand, handful by handful, but all at once. I woke up to a pillow covered in blonde. The hair I'd had since birth. The hair my mother used to braid when I was small. I crawled to the toilet and vomited until there was nothing left. At 2:47 a.m., I called my mother. The phone rang 8 times before going to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. At 3:15 a.m., I texted Harper. I think I need help. She showed up at my apartment 40 minutes later, still in her navy scrubs from a late shift. She didn't say anything, just sat with me on the bathroom floor, held back what was left of my hair, and stayed until the sun came up. My mother called back at 10:23 a.m. Sweetie, you called last night. I had my phone on silent. Madison and I were at the Mandarin Oriental Spa. Post-wedding stress relief. You know how it is. What did you need? I looked at Harper, who was making me tea in my tiny kitchen. Then I looked at the bald patches on my head in the bathroom mirror. Nothing, Mom. It was nothing. Oh, good. Well, call any time. Love you. She hung up before I could even respond. I screenshot the call log. 10:23 a.m., duration 42 seconds. And I understood, finally, what family meant in the Sterling household. 2 years later, I was cancer-free. The day Dr. Patterson looked at my latest PET scans and said those 4 monosyllabic words, no evidence of disease, the air in the sterile consultation room didn't suddenly fill with music. Instead, it went hauntingly quiet, the kind of silence that follows a massive explosion once the ringing in your ears finally stops. Sloane, you did it. You're in the clear. I walked out of her office, my heels clicking against the linoleum floor with a newfound weight, found my car in the Mass General parking garage, and cried for a straight hour. The garage smelled of exhaust fumes and cold concrete, a stark contrast to the antiseptic world I'd lived in for 24 months. Not sad tears, not even happy tears exactly, just release. 2 years of holding my breath, of bracing for the next blow from a body that felt like a biological time bomb. 2 years of expecting my parents to finally act like parents. Finally, I could exhale. The carbon dioxide leaving my lungs like a ghost departing a haunted house. A lot had changed in those 2 years. I'd been promoted to creative director at my agency. Turns out, staring down your own mortality gives you a vicious, diamond-hard clarity that corporate America deeply respects. When you've negotiated for your life with an oncologist, a boardroom full of venture capitalists from New York doesn't seem all that intimidating. My boss, Victor Reeves, had been my silent anchor. He'd kept my position open during the worst of my treatment, let me work remotely from my infusion chair when I had the energy to move a cursor, and never once made me feel like a liability or a charity case. "You're one of the best eyes in Boston, Sloane," he'd told me during a particularly brutal week when my chemo brain made me forget the name of a font. "Talent is worth waiting for. Character is worth even more. We don't build brands here. We build legacies. And you, kid, are a walking legacy of grit." I'd moved, too. I sold my little Somerville place, the apartment that still felt like a trauma ward, where the walls seemed to hold the echoes of my midnight vomiting and the scent of broken promises. I bought a condo in Beacon Hill. It was a classic Boston brownstone on a cobblestone street, featuring 12-foot ceilings, original crown molding, and a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the Charles River. In the autumn, I could watch the rowing teams glide through the water, their movements rhythmic and disciplined, a mirror to the life I was trying to reconstruct. It had enough space for my monstera, which had somehow survived the neglect, the repotting, and the heavy darkness of my sickest days. It stood in the corner of my living room, its giant green leaves reaching toward the New England sun, a living, breathing testament to sheer, stubborn survival. I bought myself a navy Loro Piana cashmere scarf to celebrate my 1-year remission. I remember walking into the boutique on Newberry Street, the quiet luxury of the space wrapping around me like a shield. It cost more than 3 months of my old state school student loan payments, and it was the most expensive thing I'd ever owned that wasn't a medical bill or a piece of high-end software. It was soft, it was warm, and most importantly, it was mine. It wasn't a gift from a father who didn't care or a mother who was too busy picking out floral arrangements. It was a trophy of a war I fought alone. Harper and I were still close, closer than ever. We had dinner every Thursday just like before, but now she felt less like a friend and more like a sister. The chosen family that the lifestyle magazines talk about, but few actually find. She was the sister I'd never had, the one who didn't care about the social standing of the Sterling name or the optics of Brooks's wedding, but cared deeply if my white blood cell count was stable. We'd spend our evenings at small, dimly lit bistros in the North End, over-ordering pasta and talking about the future as if it were a country we were finally allowed to inhabit. My family? I hadn't seen them in 2 years. We exchanged the bare minimum, the digital equivalent of white noise or the static on an old television set. A Happy New Year text sent at 12:05 a.m., a generic birthday emoji, a dry congrats when Brooks and Madison announced they were expecting a sterling heir. Nothing real, nothing that mattered. I'd made peace with it, or at least I'd made a fragile, high-walled truce with the ghost of my childhood. I had a life now, a good life, a life I'd engineered myself from the ground up without a single cent or a single word of encouragement from Richard Sterling. And then my father called. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of crisp, late autumn Boston night where the air feels like a cold sheet of glass and you can smell the salt and diesel from the harbor. I was making dinner, wild-caught salmon with roasted asparagus and a lemon dill reduction. I'd learned to actually cook during chemo when my appetite was a fickle thing and I needed to control exactly what went into my body to keep my energy up. I was standing in my kitchen, the Italian marble countertops cool under my palms and the recessed lighting casting a warm glow over my copper cookware, when my phone lit up on the counter. The vibration sounded like a warning, a persistent, rhythmic intrusion into the peace I'd spent 24 months curate. Dad. I stared at the screen. The salmon sizzled in the pan, the skin crisping to a perfect golden brown. The phone kept buzzing, dancing slightly across the stone surface. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. I'd learned to let a lot of things go: hair, friends, expectations. But something, curiosity, or maybe that residual, deep-seated muscle memory of a daughter who spent 30 years jumping when he barked, made me reach out and slide the green icon. Hello, Sloane. His voice was different, thin, brittle, like a piece of old parchment that would crumble if you touched it too hard. My father had never sounded uncertain in his life. He spoke in mandates, proclamations, and ironclad certainties. I need to see you. Not, how are you? Not, it's been way too long, honey. Not, I'm sorry I abandoned you to face stage 3 cancer alone while I was debating between the Merlot and the Cabernet for your brother's rehearsal dinner. Just, I need. The fundamental core of the Sterling men, their needs always outweighed everyone else's existence. What's going on, Dad? I asked, my voice as cool and level as the Charles River in the dead of January. A long, agonizing pause followed. In the background, I heard my mother's voice, muffled and frantic, the way she sounded when a catering order was 10 minutes late. I've been diagnosed with something, he said. Another pause, the weight of his ego struggling to admit a weakness. Parkinson's disease. Early stage, they say, but... He trailed off, the silence hanging heavy with the implication of what he couldn't bring himself to say. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the familiar Pavlovian surge of sympathy. It didn't come. The salmon was starting to smoke, the smell of charred fat beginning to fill my pristine Beacon Hill kitchen. I didn't move an inch to save it. I need my family around me right now, he finally said, his voice regaining a flicker of that old authoritarian edge. There's a dinner Sunday at the house. Your mother, Brooks, and Madison will be there. I want you there. We need to discuss the future. The future. As if I hadn't spent 2 years building a future that didn't have his name in it. As if I were a piece of furniture he'd put in storage and now decided it was time to move back into the foyer. Okay, I heard myself say. I'll be there. After I hung up, I realized something chilling. In that entire 3-minute conversation, the first real contact we'd had since I was a bald, terrified girl vomiting on a bathroom floor while he finalized a florist contract, he never once asked if I was okay. He didn't even know if I'd survived the aggressive tumor he'd dismissed 2 years ago. To him, I was just a resource that needed to be reallocated. I spent the next 2 days oscillating between dread and a dark, clinical kind of curiosity. Parkinson's disease. I looked it up because that's what I do now. I research, I audit, I prepare. Early-stage Parkinson's isn't an immediate death sentence. It's a slow, agonizing, humiliating decline. A gradual loss of the one thing Richard Dick Sterling valued more than his net worth: absolute control. Tremors that start in the fingers and spread to the soul. Stiffness that turns your own body into a cage. Eventually, difficulty walking, talking, swallowing, the basic mechanics of being human. It requires long-term intensive care. It requires a level of patience that money can't buy. It requires someone willing to put their entire life on a shelf to serve a man who never served anyone but his own image. And suddenly, I understood exactly why my father had called me. Not because he missed his daughter, not because the specter of death had forced him to regret his tattered conscience, but because I was the efficient choice, the unattached daughter, the one without a husband to answer to, without a child to prioritize, the one who, in the Sterling family ledger, had always been marked down for sacrifice. I called Harper that night. "You're actually going?" she asked, her voice tight with a protective kind of worry. "I need to know what they want, and I need them to look me in the eye when they ask for it. I need to see if they've rewritten history in their heads to make themselves the heroes of my survival." "Sloane, don't let them pull you back into that gravitational well. You're a creative director with a view of the Charles now. You're not the background radiation they used to treat you like." "I know, Harper. I'm not going to let them manipulate me. But I need to face the ghosts. Does that make sense?" Harper was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that only comes from someone who has seen you at your absolute worst. Then she said, "You know that folder you've been keeping? The Sterling's folder? The one with the screenshots of the 'we can't deal with this right now' texts? Bring it. Not to throw it in their faces, unless you have to, but to use it as a psychological anchor. Remind yourself of the objective reality when they try to gaslight you into believing they were always there for you." I hadn't opened that folder in months, but that night I sat on my silk-covered bed, the city lights of Boston twinkling outside my window, and scrolled through 2 years of cold, hard, digital evidence. The texts where my mother asked about flower types while I was in surgery. The call logs where I begged for a loan and was told to check my credit score. The hospital visitor records with my name at the top and an empty, mocking column where family should have been for 36 straight sessions. My family's love story, told in the language of institutional documentation. Sunday arrived with a heavy, overcast sky. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to construct a suit of armor. Black tailored slacks that cost more than a month's rent, a cream silk blouse that felt like water against my skin, and my Loro Piana scarf draped over my shoulders like a general's cape. I looked successful. I looked healthy. I looked like a woman who didn't need a single crumb of validation from the man sitting in that sprawling, hollow colonial house in Newton. Harper texted me as I was walking to my car. "Remember, Sloane, you survived stage 3. You survived 36 rounds of poison. You can survive a 4-course dinner with people who don't deserve your seat at the table." The drive to Newton took 40 minutes, the GPS leading me through the winding, tree-lined streets of Old Money, Massachusetts. My parents' house was exactly as I remembered. A white colonial with black shutters, 3 stories of repressed emotions, and a lawn so perfectly manicured it looked like it belonged on a postcard for privilege, silence, and emotional neglect. The house I'd grown up in, but never belonged to. The house where I'd learned that love wasn't a right. It was a performance with a very high ticket price. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, the engine idling, watching the warm, golden light spill from the dining room windows onto the brick driveway. I could see figures moving inside. My mother probably setting the table with the Vera Wang china and the Christoffel sterling silver. All the expensive, polished props of a family that was rotting from the center outward. My phone buzzed in my hand. One last text from Harper. "You've got the folder. You've got the truth. You've got the power. Don't let them take it back." She was right. I'd faced down the end of my life alone in a cold hospital room. What was a family meal compared to that? I grabbed my designer purse. Inside it, my phone, and within that phone, a digital archive of every time they failed me. I walked up the brick pathway and rang the bell. The chime sounded the same 3 notes, F, A, C. The same notes that had signaled home for 30 years. But for the first time in my life, they didn't sound like a welcome. They sounded like a declaration of war. The doorbell chimed the same 3 notes it had my whole life, a melodic F major sequence that used to signal my arrival to a place I called home, but now felt like the opening notes of a corporate deposition. My mother answered, her face arranged in an expression I couldn't quite read. It was a curated mask of joy, relief, and a thin, shimmering layer of guilt, all held together by high-end Botox and the scent of Chanel No. 5. "Sloane." She pulled me into a hug before I could react. She smelled exactly like my childhood. Expensive perfume and the faint, metallic tang of repressed emotions. She'd worn this same scent to my high school graduation, to Brooks's wedding, and likely to every important family moment that I had been edited out of. "You look wonderful. Just wonderful. Come in. The others are already in the dining room." I stepped inside and braced myself. The air in the foyer was heavy with the silence of things not said. The dining room hadn't changed in 2 years, or maybe 20. The mahogany table that sat 12, a massive, dark piece of furniture that felt like it belonged in a boardroom rather than a home, dominated the space. The crystal chandelier that my grandmother had supposedly brought over from Ireland cast a fractured, amber light across the family photos on the wall. I noticed a detail for the first time, something I'd been too blind to see before my diagnosis. The photo timeline on the wall was a curated history of the Sterling success. There was Brooks's college graduation from BC, Brooks's engagement party at the yacht club, Brooks's lavish wedding in the Berkshires. But me? I was frozen at 18, awkward in a prom dress, smiling at a camera that had stopped looking at me the moment I stopped being convenient. I was a footnote in my own family's gallery. Sloane. Brooks stood from his seat, ever the golden boy, approaching me with his arms spread wide. He had the soft, unblemished look of a man who had never had to fight for a single breath of air. Behind him, Madison remained seated, one hand resting protectively on her 5-month pregnant belly. The next generation of Sterling favoritism was already under construction. Brooks. I accepted his hug stiffly. He felt bulkier, the softness of privilege beginning to settle around his jawline. You look great, really great. His eyes flicked to my hair, grown back now, though shorter and thicker than before. He had the decency not to mention the word cancer, as if saying it would stain the expensive wallpaper. And then I saw my father. He sat at the head of the table where he'd always sat, the undisputed CEO of our domestic life. But something was fundamentally broken. He looked smaller, the sharp lines of his face blurring into a map of exhaustion. His left hand trembled slightly against the white linen tablecloth, a persistent, rhythmic shake that he tried to anchor by gripping a silver fork, but the metal only amplified the vibration. His eyes, when they met mine, held something I'd never seen in Richard Sterling. The raw, naked fear of a man who realized his money couldn't buy his way out of his own biology. Sit down, Sloane. His voice was still commanding, but it was frayed at the edges, like a transmission from a dying satellite. We have a lot to discuss. My mother served dinner, rack of lamb, roasted potatoes with rosemary, and green beans almondine. It was the Sterling standard meal, served on Vera Wang china that felt too heavy for the occasion. We ate in a silence so thick you could almost taste the tension. The only sound was the rhythmic scrape of sterling silver against bone china, filling the void where a real conversation should have been. When the plates were cleared, my father stood, or tried to. His legs seemed to resist him for a second, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the table edge for support before finding his footing. It was a performance of strength that was failing in real time. I'll get right to it, he said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man who had spent 62 years never being questioned. You all know about my diagnosis, Parkinson's. It's early stage, but the doctors are clear. It's going to progress. I'm going to need assistance long term. Physical therapy, medication management, daily monitoring. He let that hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating weight. My mother looked down at her hands. Brooks shifted in his seat, looking at his wineglass. Madison rubbed her belly. We've discussed it as a family, he continued. I wondered when this family discussion had happened, since I was clearly not on the calendar invite. And we believe the best arrangement, the only logical one, is for someone to move back home to manage my care. His eyes landed on me, sharp and expectant. Sloane, you're the obvious choice. I felt the word obvious like a physical slap across the face. Not the best choice, not the preferred choice, but the liquidated asset choice. The leftover daughter. The one without a husband to protect her time, without a child to excuse her from service, without anything in her life that Richard Sterling deemed important enough to respect. You work from home mostly, don't you? He continued, his tone turning transactional. In that little apartment in the city? You don't have a family of your own to worry about. I've already had your old room prepared. It's time you came back and finally contributed to this family. Contributed. The word felt like a jagged piece of glass in my throat, as if I'd been lounging in luxury while they ignored my chemotherapy, as if the only value I possessed was my capacity for servitude. Brooks nodded, not meeting my eyes. It just makes sense, Sloane. I've got the baby coming in 4 months, and my new VP position at the firm is taking up 80 hours a week. You understand, right? We have to prioritize the new generation. I looked at my father, his trembling hand, his expectant face, and I felt a cold, crystalline laughter bubbling up inside me. You have a responsibility to this family, Sloane, my mother added, her voice soft but insistent, the tone she used when she wanted to guilt me into compliance without looking like the villain. Your father needs you. I've been working 60-hour weeks to hit my targets before the paternity leave, Brooks added, leaning back with the unearned confidence of a man who had never been told no. And with Madison's pregnancy being high risk, I can't be in 2 places at once. We've already factored you into the care plan. Factored me in. Like I was a line item in a budget. Like I was a piece of equipment they were moving from one warehouse to another. Madison stayed silent, but her eyes were locked on me. There was something there, not sympathy, but a wary recognition, like she was watching a trap snap shut and was just glad it wasn't her leg inside it. Think about what you're asking, I said quietly, my voice steady, though my heart was thundering against my ribs. We're not asking. My father's voice hardened, the old patriarch returning for one last stand. We're telling you what needs to happen. You're the daughter. This is what daughters do. They take care of their fathers. This is what daughters do. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I felt the old, familiar pressure to comply, to make myself small so the Sterling ego could remain large. But that Sloane, the one who lived for their approval, had died on a bathroom floor 2 years ago, alone and shivering. Before I answer, I said, leaning forward, the light from the chandelier reflecting in my eyes, I want to ask you something, Dad. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? No, let me rephrase that. When was the last time you asked if I was even still alive? The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's curated smile froze into a grimace. Brooke suddenly became very interested in the label on the wine bottle. Even Madison leaned back, creating physical distance between herself and the blast zone. What are you talking about? My father asked, but his voice had lost its edge. Don't be dramatic, Sloane. We're talking about a medical crisis. I'm asking a simple question, I continued, my voice gaining a razor-sharp precision. You say I have a responsibility to this family. But when I was sick, really sick, writing my will sick, where was this family? Dad, do you even know if I'm still in remission? Do you know what my last PET scan showed? Do you have any idea what my white blood cell count is today? Another silence, sharper than the last. You're sitting here looking perfectly healthy to me, my father snapped, his frustration boiling over. Am I wrong? You're working, you're dressed in silk, you're fine. My Parkinson's is a reality, Sloane. Your little health scare is in the past. My little health scare. The tumor that had been aggressive, the poison that had stripped me of my hair and my dignity, it was now a little scare to justify his needs. I had stage 3 cancer, Dad. I let the words land like lead weights on the mahogany table. I went through 6 months of chemotherapy. I lost 15 pounds of muscle and every strand of hair on my body. I spent $47,000 out of my own pocket because you told me you couldn't help because of Brooks's venue deposit. I spent 36 nights in a hospital chair alone. My father's mouth opened and closed, his trembling hand twitching violently now. For the first time in my life, I saw Richard Sterling speechless. And here's the part I need you to understand. I reached for my purse slowly, deliberately. My hands weren't shaking at all. I was the calmest person in the room, the only one fortified by the truth. I'm cancer-free now. 2 years in remission. But you didn't know that, did you? You never asked because you didn't care as long as I wasn't an inconvenience. I pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in the dim light, a digital ghost of the past 2 years. You never asked because in your world, Sloane Sterling only exists when she's useful. My father's face had gone a sickly, ashen pale. My mother was crying now, silent, performative tears, the kind she used to look fragile without actually having to do anything. That's not fair, Sloane, she whispered. We were dealing with the wedding. It was so much pressure. The wedding? I nodded slowly. Brooks's $80,000 wedding. The one that was important enough to brag about to Aunt Linda, but my survival wasn't important enough for a single hospital visit? Not once. Not one single time in 36 trips. Brooks shifted uncomfortably, his golden boy mask slipping. Cam, Sloane, come on. We didn't know it was that serious. You always seem so independent. I called Dad the day I got my diagnosis. I looked directly at my father, pinning him with a gaze that refused to let him turn away. I was crying. I was terrified. And you said, and I quote, "We can't deal with this right now. Your brother is planning his wedding." I wouldn't have said it like that, my father stammered. Yes, you did. I unlocked my phone, opened the folder titled The Sterlings, and placed it face up on the mahogany table, sliding it toward the center like a winning hand in a high-stakes poker game. Would you like to see the screenshots? I have the text where you told me to get a personal loan for my chemo because the wedding budget was tight. I have the call logs from 3 a.m. when Mom didn't answer because she was at a spa for post-wedding stress relief. I scrolled to the most devastating document of all. And here, this is the official hospital visitor log. Lines and lines of dates. My name at the top. And that one column on the right under visitors. Look at it, Brooks. Look at it, Mom. The word none repeated down the page in a cold digital font. None. 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 36 sessions, 0 family members. The room went absolutely silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Madison's hand had dropped from her belly. She was staring at the phone, then at Brooks, then at my parents. The Sterling legacy was being audited in front of her eyes, and the balance was 0. I slid the phone further toward my father. The screen glowed against the dark wood of the table, a beacon of objective reality in a house built on lies. You want to talk about the future, Dad? You want to talk about what daughters do? Look at that log, because that is exactly what this family did for me. The silence that followed my declaration was the loudest, most suffocating sound I'd ever heard in that house. It was the sound of 30 years of Sterling family mythology collapsing under the weight of 36 pages of hospital documentation. My mother was crying openly now, not the performative, delicate tears of earlier, but something raw and ugly. Her mascara was running, leaving dark, jagged tracks down her cheeks that made her look older, more human, and utterly defeated. I didn't know, she kept whispering, her voice cracking like dry wood. Sloane, I swear, I didn't know it was that bad. You knew, Mom, I said, and the words felt like a final clinical diagnosis. You just chose the optics of a perfect wedding over the reality of your daughter's survival. You didn't know because looking would have cost you your comfort. Brooks was still holding my phone, his eyes darting back and forth across the screen like he was looking for a technicality, a loophole, anything that would prove they weren't the villains in my story. He wouldn't find it. The digital timestamps were as immovable as the tumors they'd ignored. My father finally spoke, his voice rough and broken, the old authority replaced by a desperate, fraying rasp. This is the past, Sloane. What's done is done. We can't change it. What matters now is the present. I'm sick. I need help. We have to move forward as a family. I almost laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. Forward? I repeated, letting the word hang in the air like a bitter New England frost. You want to move forward now that the bill has finally come due? You want to wave your trembling hand and erase 2 years of isolation because you've run out of options? Whatever happened then? He waved that hand dismissively, as if my stage 3 cancer were a minor scheduling conflict in his social calendar. We need to focus on the care plan. I need a caregiver. You're the daughter. It's the natural order of things. Madison cleared her throat. It was the first sound she'd made in 20 minutes. Richard, she said, her voice carefully neutral, her eyes fixed on the hospital visitor log still glowing on the table. Did you actually know about the $47,000? Did you know she was calling at 3 a.m. while we were at the spa? My father didn't answer. He couldn't. He knew. The words came from Brooks, quiet and horrified. He was looking at a screenshot of a text message, the one where our father had told me to check my credit score instead of offering a loan. Dad, you knew she was drowning. My father's composure finally broke. The Sterling patriarch evaporated, leaving behind a scared, aging man who realized he had bankrupted his own soul. The wedding, the timing, There were considerations, he stammered. Considerations, I said, standing up slowly and smoothing down my silk blouse with a deliberate, lethal calm. There were considerations. And now, I have some of my own. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my designer purse. My mother reached for my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Please, Sloane, don't walk out. We're family. Let me tell you what family means, Mom, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of 2 years of chemotherapy. Family means showing up when the light goes out. Family means answering the phone at 2 a.m. without checking your social calendar. Family means offering to pay for a life-saving treatment instead of an $80,000 party. At the very bare minimum, family means visiting your daughter in the hospital once, just once in 36 sessions. My mother's face crumpled. Brooks had the decency to look at the floor, his golden boy shoulders slumped in shame. I spent 6 months fighting for my life, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the expensive china and the crystal chandelier. I spent 6 months with poison dripping into my veins, losing my hair, losing my dignity, losing my faith in people. And where was my family? You were tasting wedding cakes. You were picking out floral arrangements. You were living a fairy tale while I was living a horror movie. Sloane, please, my father tried again. No. The word came out sharp enough to draw blood. You don't get to call me that anymore. I am not your contingency plan. I am not the daughter you call when your body finally betrays you after you ignored mine. I am not the consolation prize for your failure to plan. I grabbed my purse and my Loro Piana scarf, the navy wool feeling like a badge of honor. You have a son, I said, looking at Brooks. A son you paid $80,000 to celebrate. A son you've never asked to sacrifice a single Saturday. Why don't you factor him into your care plan? Brooks's head snapped up. I can't, Sloane. I have a baby coming. I have the VP track. I have responsibilities. So did I. I met his eyes with a cold, unwavering stare. I had a career. I had a life. I had cancer. And I handled all of it alone because you were all too busy to care. Figure it out, Brooks. It's your turn to be the obvious choice. I started toward the door, my heels clicking firmly against the hardwood floors. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, broken in a way I'd never heard it before. Sloane, please. I'm begging you. I'm scared. I'm so scared of what's coming. I need you. I stopped and turned. My father was crying. Richard Dick Sterling, the man who had ruled Newton with an iron will, was sobbing like a child. I'd never seen him cry. Not once in 30 years. Not when his own parents died. Not when the market crashed. But now, the tears were streaming down his face as his trembling hand wiped at them ineffectually. For one brief, treacherous second, I felt the old pull, the desperate Pavlovian need to be the good daughter, to earn the love I'd been denied by saving him. But that little girl had grown up. She had been forged in the fire of an oncology ward. She had rebuilt her soul from the ashes of their neglect. She didn't need his approval anymore. She needed her own respect. "Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I hear you. I understand that you're scared. But there's something you need to hear." I took one step closer, close enough that he could see the health in my face and the steel in my eyes. 2 years ago, I called you crying. I told you I was terrified. I told you I was dying. And do you remember what you said to me? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The memory was etched into the silence of the room. You said, "We can't deal with this right now." I let the words settle over the table like a death sentence. "So here's my answer, Dad." I smiled. Not a bitter smile, but one of absolute, radiant peace. "I can't deal with this right now." 4 words. The exact same words he'd used to dismiss my life were now the words I used to reclaim mine. My mother gasped. Brooks's jaw dropped. My father stared at me, the full, crushing weight of his own history finally hitting him. I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't run. I walked past the family photos that didn't include me, past the crystal chandelier and the mahogany furniture and all the expensive, hollow props of a family that had failed its most basic test. I opened the front door and stepped onto the brick pathway. The cool evening air hit my face like a benediction. My car was waiting in the driveway. A car I'd bought with my own hard-earned commissions, not a graduation gift or a family hand-me-down. Behind me, the door opened again. My mother ran onto the pathway, her voice high and desperate. "Sloane, wait! Please don't do this! We're your family! We love you!" I stopped at the car door and turned one last time. "Mom," I said gently, "family doesn't leave you alone to die. And love isn't something you only offer when you need a favor in return. That's not a family. That's a transaction. And I'm closing the account." I got in, started the engine, and adjusted my mirrors. In the rear view, I could see them. A fractured, aging dynasty standing in the golden light of a house that was now just a very expensive cage. I pulled out of the driveway onto the tree-lined street, and I didn't look back. For the first time in 30 years, the air in my lungs felt like it belonged to me. I was finally, truly, free. 1 week later, my mother called. I answered not because I owed her, but because I was curious about how the Sterling Standard handled reality. "Sloane," her voice was tired, sounding 10 years older than she had at dinner. "I wanted you to know. Brooks has had to take a leave of absence from the firm. Your father's condition is progressing faster than the doctors expected. He needs daily assistance now, meals, meds, help dressing." I listened without comment, watching the sunlight bounce off the Charles River from my Beacon Hill window. "Brooks is doing it," she continued, her voice flat. "He didn't have a choice. With Madison pregnant, they couldn't afford a live-in team, and your father refused to go to a facility. Brooks missed a major project last week. His supervisor isn't happy. There's talk he might be passed over for the promotion." I thought about Golden Boy Brooks, who had never been asked to sacrifice a single hour of his life for anyone. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it, not for Brooks, but for the inevitable collision between his privilege and the real world. Madison is stressed, my mother added. She says she's starting to understand why you left. She's seeing the patterns now. That sit with me for a moment. Madison, the silent observer, was finally waking up to the cost of being a Sterling. Thanks for telling me, Mom, I said. I hope Brooks figures it out. I hung up. 3 weeks later, I received a text from my mother. It was different from anything she'd ever sent. Sloane, I've been thinking. I owe you an apology, a real one. I should have protected you. I should have stood up to your father. I should have been there, and I wasn't. I have to live with that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just telling you that I see it now. I see what we did. I read it 3 times. It was the first time in her life she hadn't used the passive voice. Mistakes were made had finally become, I failed you. I didn't respond immediately. On the 3rd day, I wrote back, I appreciate you saying that. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I hear you. Her response was instant. That's okay. Whenever you're ready. Or never. Whatever you need. Whatever you need. 4 words that were a world away from the ones I'd been given 2 years ago. The letter from my father arrived 2 weeks after that. It was handwritten, the penmanship shaky and uneven, the letters wobbling across the page as his hands fought the Parkinson's. Sloane, it began. I am not good at this. Your mother says it's pride. She's right. I failed you. Not because I didn't know better, but because I made a choice. Your brother's happiness over your survival. I will carry that forever. I am not asking you to come back. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see the woman you became without me. You are stronger than I ever was. I'm sorry. It's not enough, but it's all I have. Your father, if you'll allow it, Richard. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away. I showed it to Harper over dinner that Thursday at our favorite spot in the North End. She read it slowly, then squeezed my hand. How do you feel? I feel sad for him, I admitted, for what he's losing. But I don't feel guilty. I've spent my whole life trying to fill a cup with a hole in the bottom, Harper. I'm finally done pouring myself empty. 6 months later, I was still cancer-free. Dr. Patterson used the word thriving at my checkup, and for once, I didn't brace for impact. I was a creative director with a view of the skyline. I was mentoring 2 junior designers who looked up to me. And I was dating someone. His name was James, a high school history teacher with kind eyes and a terrible sense of humor. He knew about the cancer. He knew about the folder titled The Sterlings, and he didn't try to fix me. He just showed up consistently for every date, every call, every moment. I'm sitting in a coffee shop in the Seaport district now, finishing this story. The afternoon sun is hitting the glass buildings, turning the whole harbor to gold. Harper will be here in 20 minutes. My phone is in my pocket. Inside it, there's still a folder called The Sterlings. I don't look at it much anymore, but I keep it as a reminder of the day I chose myself. I'm Sloane, I'm 30 years old. I'm a survivor. And I finally understand that family isn't blood. It's the people who show up when the world goes dark. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from the people who never loved you back. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself. Really.